Well, let's continue to talk about the event down under, but let's shift to the Oceanic representatives, looking at the eight there for this week and next week. Who have you got your eye on the most?
Well, it's been a common theme for me these last few minutes talking about players that might be in the twilight of their careers. But when it comes to darts down under, Simon Whitlock's name is high on the list. He's been a regular in the World Series events in Australia and New Zealand over the years, and rightly so. He's been based in the UK for a long time now, but he's always flown the flag for Australia, and he deserves his place in the field. But again, I think we are coming into a potentially crucial 4 to 5 months in the career of Simon Whitlock. We're over halfway through the Players' Championships for this year now after last week's events in Milton Keynes. And Simon Whitlock, he's got a lot of work to do to get to the World Championships. He's around 5 grand off the Pro Tour spots, which isn't a lot with so many events still left to go, but it's not a position that you want to find yourself in coming into August, September time, fighting for results to get to the World Championship. And looking at the tour card race, this is info via dartsrankings.com. I'm sure many of our listeners use the site, but go and check it out if you haven't. But Simon Whitlock currently 56th on that post Ali Pally order merit, around 11.5 grand clear of 65th. So it's unlikely at the moment, but it's not completely out of the question that if Simon Whitlock misses the World Championship, he could end up losing his tour card. And does he go to Q School and try and win it back if that happens, or is he going to venture down another route, go to the World Seniors, the Modus Super Series? That's on his doorstep. If he was to do that way, we're probably not going to see him in these World Series events next year. So I think for Simon Whitlock, he knows he's got a lot of hard work ahead of him when he gets back to the UK to get to the World Championship. But for these next 2 weekends, I think he can use these events as a chance to make that early start on rebuilding some confidence, finding some form, ready to take into those Pro Tours coming up. But beyond Simon, just a word on a couple other players, two Kiwis. I'd say the unofficial number one and number two for me from New Zealand. You've got Hope Ipua, who you heard from earlier, the first player from New Zealand to win a tour card, and someone that is improving all the time. And his World Cup partner, Ben Robb, who you're going to see next week in Hamilton. And our next guest you're going to hear from in a moment, Ben Francis, he reckons that Ben Robb is going to be the next Kiwi to get on the tour. And I can't argue with him because I think Ben has got a lot of talent, a lot of potential. And I don't think it's going to be long before he makes a mark on the big stage. And it could be next week. He could go and beat one of those 8 PDC players.
I'm also curious to see how the two key how Paipua does and how Simon Whitlock does, but I'm more interested here in seeing the players that we've never seen before try to give it a go and we don't know much about. You look at someone like Brenton Lloyd, who will be in the Australian Darts Masters this upcoming week. He's made four finals so far this year in the DPA Tour, and he's second in the order of merit behind Jeremy Fagg, who's won two, including averaging over 90 in one of those, which doesn't sound like much, but if you look at the averages overall, they're usually mid 80s. And he averaged 93 and beating Brenton Lloyd in Geelong in April. But Lloyd's made four finals this year, and he's won half of them. And he's one of the only two players who've won multiple events so far this year. But I'm also I want to see Joe Comodo making two finals himself, winning one of them. These are players we haven't seen, we don't know much about. I'm curious to see how they perform. But I do agree. It's huge for Simon Whitlock. He has really regressed. And, go back to the World Championships last year. It did looked like that was the end for Simon Whitlock. He looked a beaten player. He looked a shell of himself. But he fought back and he showed nerve and bottle in that match. And even though for much of it he looked the second best player, he had a fighting spirit and he was able to turn that match against Paulo Narita around and come back and win it. And he's a player who's done that so often in his career. I mentioned earlier about Peter Wright. Every time we think he's done, he does something out of nowhere. Similar to Simon Whitlock, dropped out of the Premier League, hadn't won in years, and all of a sudden he wins 5 events in the space of 6 months and becomes one of the best players in the world again. But Simon Whitlock is not that player anymore. He's not even a top 64 player right now on current form. Just like it's an important week for Damon Hedda, it's also an important week for Simon Whitlock. I want to see how he takes back to the big stage, but I fear the worst for him right now unless he draws Peter Wright, in which case I fear for all of us because the match might never end. But it's he's not the main reason I'm watching this. The main reason is to see these new players, assuming I do watch it because it'll be on at a weird hour. These players we haven't seen before, the Joe Comatos of the world and the Brenton Lloyds of the world. That's what I'm looking forward to this upcoming week.